Hello and welcome. If you've ever looked at a struggling houseplant or heard about a crop failing and wondered what's really going on, well, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to break down the language of plant pathology. It's like learning the secret code to see the world through a plant scientist's eyes. So let's start with a basic question. What does a sick plant actually look like? Seems simple enough, right? You probably picture some yellow leaves, maybe a few weird spots, but the world of plant disease is way more complex and honestly a lot more fascinating than just what you see on the surface. Take this plant, for example. The real trouble here started completely out of sight, way down in the roots. And to really get what's happening with this plant or any sick plant, we need to speak the same language. We need a specific vocabulary. And that's what we're going to build today. So here's the plan. We'll start with what a disease even is. Then we'll look at the two main types. We'll meet the attackers, the pathogens, and we'll walk through the timeline of an infection. And finally, we'll zoom out and see how these diseases play out on a massive scale. All right, let's dive right in with the most fundamental question of all. In the plant world, what even is a disease? The keywords here are continuous irritation. This isn't just a bug that takes one bite and moves on. A disease is a persistent, ongoing problem. It's a constant struggle that causes the plant's own cells and tissues to malfunction. Now, that irritant we just talked about can come from two totally different sources. And this brings us to the first major fork in the road when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with a plant. On one hand, you've got your infectious diseases. These are also called biotic because they're caused by living things, fungi, bacteria, that kind of stuff. It's like the flu, it can spread from one plant to another. But on the other hand, you have non-infectious or abiotic diseases. These are caused by something in the environment, and a plant just can't catch this from its neighbor. And there's an official term for these non-infectious problems, a disorder. This is what happens when a plant gets too much or too little of something absolutely vital. Think too much salt in the soil, not enough sun, or crazy temperatures. It's a condition, not a contagion. Okay, so let's jump back to the infectious side of things and talk about the culprits themselves, because they have some surprisingly different strategies for how they attack a plant. First, let's get the name right. The attacker is called a pathogen. This is the little microbe that actually causes the disease. But here's the cool part. Not all pathogens eat the same way. They have these really distinct lifestyles. So, first up is the biotroph. Think of this pathogen like a really careful parasite, almost like a sneaky freeloader. It needs the plant to stay alive because that's its food source. So it gently siphons off nutrients, trying its best to keep the host up and running. Its entire strategy is about long-term survival on a living plant. And then you have the complete opposite, the perthotroph, which also goes by necrotroph. This one is the demolition crew. It doesn't need a living host at all. In fact, it does the opposite. It kills the plant's tissues first with toxins, and then it just moves in to feed on the dead, decaying stuff. It's a total brute force attack. And finally, you get the hemibiotroph, which is kind of the best of both worlds. It has a two-phase strategy. It starts out all sneaky, acting like a biotroph on living tissue. But then, once that tissue dies, it can just switch gears and start feeding on the dead material like a necrotroph. Talk about adaptable, right? So, we've met the players, but how does the game actually unfold? Let's walk through the story of an infection, from the very beginning to the end. This whole process, this sort of narrative of a disease, has a name. It's called pathogenesis. It's the step-by-step story of how a perfectly healthy plant gets sick. So the story kicks off with the inoculum. That's just the little piece of the pathogen that makes first contact. If it's successful, that leads to infection, where it actually gets inside and sets up shop. Then there's this quiet phase, the incubation period. The pathogen is multiplying, but the plant, it looks totally fine. And then finally, the disease becomes visible through symptoms and signs. Okay, now this is so important because people mix these two up all the time. On the left, we see a symptom. Those discolored spots, that's the plant's reaction to being sick. But on the right, that's a sign. That dark, fuzzy growth is the actual pathogen itself. And knowing the difference is absolutely critical. A symptom tells you your plant is sick. Finding a sign tells you exactly what you're fighting. A symptom is the cry for help. A sign is catching the culprit in the act. All right, let's zoom out for a minute. Because how a disease behaves across an entire field, or even a whole region, is just as important as what it does to a single plant. We basically classify these big outbreaks in three main ways: An epidemic is like a huge, destructive wildfire that flares up over a wide area, but maybe not every year. An endemic disease is more of a constant, low-level problem that you just kind of expect to see in a particular area. And then sporadic is the most unpredictable. It's like a random pop-up storm that happens at irregular times and places. And this is not just abstract stuff. This has massive real-world impact. That term, epidemic, the devastating Irish famine back in the 1840s was caused by a single plant epidemic, late blight of potato. It wiped out the main food source for millions of people. It's incredibly powerful stuff.
So there you have it. We've armed you with the language to see the world of plants in a whole new way. The next time you see a sick plant, you can start asking the right questions. Is this a disorder or a disease? Is the attacker a biotroph or a necrotroph? And here's something to think about. How would you even know if a problem in your own garden was just a local issue or maybe the very beginning of something much, much bigger?